Welcome to week 4 of our study in prayer. So far we've been talking about prayer as a conversation with God that helps us to develop a deeper relationship with Him. That's really our goal in prayer, is to develop a relationship with God. And we've learned some things about how to do that. Jesus set a pattern for us of praise, repenting, asking, and yielding to cover, the different dimensions of prayer. And last time we looked at some ways that God answers prayer and some things that we can and we should be praying for, or that is to say, talking to God about in our relationship with Him. Like any relationship, things get in the way. You don't come to someone and ask them for a favor if there's a problem in your relationship. And so we're going to look at some ways that we can make sure that relationship is going strong. In session number 1, we're looking at some hindrances. And we touched on this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about repenting. But the Bible makes it really clear that unconfessed sin stands in the way of our relationship with God and thus in the way of our prayer. In Psalm 66, it says, "If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But God has surely listened and has heard my prayer." If we come to God and we're just not right with Him, and we're doing things that don't please Him, and we're out of step with His purpose, His will, His character, His holiness, then we can't expect God to really listen to our prayers until we get right with Him. We can't see the relationship develop until we get right with Him. And so He talks about cherishing sin in our hearts. That's kind of like holding on to sin. I'm not willing to let it go. I'm really putting that sin or that behavior, that attitude ahead of God. And so that, of course, then is going to hinder our relationship with Him. And we're not going to have that intimacy with God that we might expect. Now, another thing that gets in the way of our prayer relationship with God is when we're hard-hearted toward the needs of other people. It seems hypocritical for us to be asking God for our needs when we don't care about the needs of others. And that's the gist of Proverbs 21, verse 13. It says, "Whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered." Now, what is that about? In prayer, it's a relationship that God wants to use to draw us into His heart, to help us experience more and more what His heart and His priorities in the world are. And so God's kind of saying to us, look, when you get my heart is for the poor. My heart is for the needy and the powerless of this world. And when you start to get that, then our hearts are combined and united. And of course, then I'll hear your prayers because you're in sync with my heart. And then James chapter 4 tells us that if we have wrong motives, then we're not going to be heard in our prayer. It says, "You desire but do not have. You covet but you cannot get what you want. You do not have because you do not ask God. And when you do ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." He's saying, look, you should come to God with stuff. We talked about that before. But when you do come to God, then don't come with the wrong motives, selfish motives, asking God just things that are just for me. Again, that puts our hearts out of sync with God, and it makes it hard for Him to relate to the things that we're asking and asking Him to do for us. And so, really, as part of this living, ongoing relationship with God, God uses prayer to change our hearts. God uses prayer to bring us more in step with His priorities, with His character, with the things that matter to Him, with what He's like. And so, that's why these 3 different areas of life are hindrances to prayer, because they reflect our hearts being out of step with the heart of God. And so here's something to discuss. I encourage you to pause the video now and discuss the questions on the screen.